Greetings and salutations, and thank you for clicking on this video. Today we're going to take a look at Ubuntu GNOME 16.10. This is a distribution of Linux that I've been following for quite some time. For a while, this was my distro of choice. That was a long time ago. But if you're a long-time viewer of the channel, you may remember that I have a video up called Ubuntu GNOME Best Distribution Ever. I do realize that some folks out there call this GNOME. And I grew up calling it GNOME, so I call it GNOME. There doesn't seem to be a consensus on which one is absolutely right or wrong. I call it GNOME. There you go. You want to call it GNOME, you go right ahead. For the new children who are not familiar with the GNOME 3 desktop, let us first take a look around the desktop and I'll show you some of the basic functions. What you see on your screen is not what you get when you install it. I have done a lot to this desktop and I'll go through those modifications as the video progresses. When you first install it, for instance, you do not have an active desktop, so you don't have any icons on the desktop, you can't create files here, that sort of thing. That is something that I like to have, so therefore I turn that feature on, and we'll talk about how you do that a little bit later on. So we'll start in the upper left hand corner of the screen, and that's a hot corner. You just kind of bang the mouse up there, just take that little pointer and bang it into the corner, and it will open up the activities screen, or you can click on activities, either way, and you'll get this kind of strange looking screen right here. So over here you have your favorites. These are applications that you can pin to this favorites bar, and then you can just hit activities and click on them, and there you go. You can also search for applications and files here. So for instance, if I start typing in Thunderbird, it goes directly to Thunderbird, plus it finds other things that are related to it. And that actually works for files on the system too. So if I put in Steely Dan, you'll see that it's finding Steely Dan songs, and it will find files in the system as well. It doesn't list everything, but just a few of them. So that is your search function, and you can get extensions and tweak that and have different filters and lenses and whatever they call them going on with that. I don't really bother with it because the basic functionality is enough for me. Down here you can look at all of the applications that you have installed on your system. Usually it goes to frequent first. That's usually where it's at. You could just leave it like that because anything that you've clicked on a lot and opened up will show up. And then we have all of the applications. The distribution does not come with a whole bunch of applications installed. So you have to kind of know what you want to get it working. But that's really no big deal if you have a little bit of Linux experience. This is not like Linux Mint and comes all configured out of the box. This is not a newbie experience. You would have to have a little bit more Linux knowledge in order to make this work for you. So a few of the applications that come installed by default, they have the Evolution Mail. That is the default mail in the GNOME desktop. I did not uninstall it, but I have no intention of using it. It integrates with the calendar here, and so therefore I just left it there and installed Thunderbird next to it. I'm not a fan of Evolution. I used to use it years ago, but then they changed some things about it, and then it got to a place where I liked Thunderbird better, so no big deal. You can just leave that installed or remove it or do whatever you want with it. They have a set of applications that come installed. You get the basic stuff. You get like Rhythm Box is installed so you can play music. And then of course all of the GNOME suite of applications are here, or at least most of them. You get an application called Videos that plays music and video, which is fine with me. I don't really feel the need to add to it. And then as far as software is concerned, they have the GNOME software application, which Ubuntu adopted not too long ago as their main software application. We'll take a look at that in just a couple of moments. They have an application in here that I just don't see any use in at all, and it's Photos. I'm going to open this up. This just doesn't do much. It just takes everything that's in your Pictures folder and displays it, and then it appears here that you can create albums and favorites, but beyond that there's not much to this. I really don't see the point in Photos. They have the image viewer in here, so I went ahead and installed GThumb so that I could do things with photos that were more advanced. And GThumb is also a GNOME application, but it doesn't come by default. And let's see what else comes here with the system that is interesting to look at. Let's look at software, because that is an interesting application. So this is what GNOME software looks like, and when you first install it, this is the default software application for installing it and also installing things you download like deb packages. So if you click on a deb package, it'll jump to this. Of course, you guys know me, I put GDebi on here because I really don't like using these big applications to install packages. But it'll let you do things like updates, and you can see if the system is up to date, and show you a list of what's installed. It's not a bad application, but some folks were having major problems with it when it was first introduced full-time in Ubuntu in 16.04. They've probably ironed all that out. I just don't use these kind of applications to work with software. I use Synaptic Package Manager or something like that. So moving on in the activities menu, over here you have your dynamic virtual desktops. When you first boot up the system, you'll only see 2 desktops, and then as you add things you'll get more, and when you take things away then you'll see that desktops will come and go and disappear. So that's pretty cool. Like a lot of desktops have a fixed number. So like Unity and Cinnamon, you start out with 4, you can add and delete, but it's manual. This does it dynamically, and I have always kind of liked that. So getting out of that particular functionality of the system, we come up here, and then this bar up at the top in the middle, we have a calendar, and this is also where your notifications show up. So if you have anything that happens on the system, this is where they'll be, and then when you click on that, they'll be listed. You can always go back and check out your notifications. We don't have any current notifications. And then we have the calendar over here, which you can integrate with Evolution, as I mentioned earlier, and also this will integrate with Google Calendar and a few other applications as well. Now, I'm not big on calendars, so that's not functionality that I really need. This is an extension that I added to the system just to play around with the extensions a little bit, and this gives me my local weather when I hover over top of it. So that's pretty cool. And then over here we have this block of indicators, which essentially opens up the same thing. You'll see it's all one thing if you look at the upper left hand side of your screen, and it's got the volume, it's got my microphone volume there, and then we have the networks. It shows the Wi-Fi network, and that's pretty straightforward. And then here is the accounts, and I can switch user, log out, or go to account settings. Down here we have the settings menu, and it's very Spartan. There's not a whole lot here. It's real basic stuff. You can do backgrounds, and you can notifications. Privacy is what controls whether the screen locks when it goes blank. So there's no like screen locker here or screensaver or anything. It's in there. And so they've really consolidated a lot of these different settings. The firewall I installed, I'm kind of surprised to see that showed up. That's the GUFW firewall configuration tool. So I installed it. It does not come with a firewall in there. And it's like all the basic stuff. It's printers, sound, that sort of thing. Curious thing about printers. This was something that I found very interesting. So setting up the printer was really no problem whatsoever, except I wanted to share my printer. And there is absolutely no facility here to do that. There is no mention anywhere of sharing a printer on the internet with cups. And so therefore I was scratching my head going, well, how do I configure that? So I went and checked to see whether the cup server was installed and enabled. Yes, it was up and running, but yet I have absolutely no, there's nothing here to do that. You get all kinds of really groovy printer options. Then you can set up your printer. That's not a problem, but no way to share. So what I ended up doing was going to the internet to find out what the deal was, and to configure your printer to be shared on the internet with cups, you need to actually log in to the cups server running on your local machine through a browser. And then once you do that, it's no big deal. You can just set everything up. So if I go to administration, you'll see that I have the printer set to share and everything works the way it's supposed to. But that was really strange because every other distribution of Linux that I play with, or every other desktop, when you go to printers, they have something there where you can share the printer. It's part of the little printer application. GNOME has decided that you don't need that functionality there, and so you have to go to the CUPS server configuration through your browser. So that was a little bit strange. And we're going to come back to this screen here in a little while because I want to talk about some other things that I ran into that were kind of weirdness like that in the GNOME desktop. They keep, for some reason or other, they kind of keep removing tools. It's like they remove settings, which is a complaint that people lodge against GNOME 3. We'll talk more about that at the end because I want to go through a little bit of the politics around the GNOME 3 desktop environment. So the next thing that I want to show you is, well, let's go back over here. I'll show you what these buttons do. Let me get out of the activity screen. Just escape to do that, or to get to the activity screen, you hit the super key. I didn't press escape, I pressed something else. But super key will turn it on, super key will turn it off, and the escape button will get you out of whatever you're into. That's pretty logical. So we have the settings here. And then the next thing that you will see is we will have the ability to lock the screen. So I just locked my screen, and then I can use the space bar or the mouse to drag that up and type in your password, and now you're back to your screen. So that's how that functionality works. And then over here it asks you whether you want to power off the system, all that kind of stuff. We're going to cancel all that. No, we are not going to quit. So that tells you what that's going to do. And you may see another button come up if you have a laptop that controls the accelerometer to, I don't quite know what all that does, but I have seen that little thing pop up, and the first time I saw it I went, what was that? You can turn, the desktop can detect whether the laptop is moving or the position of the laptop or something like that. It can flip the screen around if you have one of those flip around laptops or whatever. That functionality will only show up if you, of course, have one of those systems. So that's it. This is the desktop. It's basically it. So the next thing I want to show you is a tool that you have to use to get into the system to make it more functional, and that is the tweak tool. When they first went to GNOME 3, they didn't include the tweak tool. You had to go get it to get these settings. So here's where I can turn on my desktop, make it active, or rather, I switched in the dark theme. Desktop is here. So the first one is about appearance. You can add different themes, and you can download themes, and you can change it. Right now I'm just using pretty much GNOME stock theme that's dark. And then for the desktop here, you can enable it, and then you can say what folders you want to show up. I have home and mounted volume set for that. You can also turn on other functions here, which I really didn't get too far into. Here's where you can adjust the fonts. If you try and scale your fonts here, then once you get up past a certain point, it activates a little menu that pops up here for accessibility options. So you can switch on large text and things like that. Can you say that? Large text? I'm having a hard time getting that out of my mouth. So I opted to just size the fonts manually, and you can change the fonts here if you want to. So keyboard and mouse, power, gives you a few more in-depth settings for power, mainly having to do with laptops. Startup applications. You can add or remove startup applications from here. There's another application in here that does kind of the same thing. So if I go to startup applications here, you'll see that we get this one that comes up. No, that's not it. What was that? Ew, make a startup disk. That's what I clicked on. Let's do that again. Got a little ahead of myself. There we go. Startup applications. So they have it set where GNOME software comes on when you boot up. I guess that's to look for updates. I disabled that. And then the welcome screen, which I certainly don't need. So anyway, you can add stuff here. That's the whole point there. Let's see here. You can do some things with the top bar. Like I have it set up to show the full date. You can show seconds on the clock. Workspaces. that sort of thing. So you get the idea. This is the GNOME tweak tool. So between the settings and this is the what you have to work with on the system. Next thing I want to talk about is extensions, because as soon as I mentioned on Facebook that I was running GNOME 3, everybody jumped in and said, oh, you've got to check out this extension. You've got to check out that extension. And you've got to see what this is. I'm not a big fan of extensions on desktops or browsers because extensions break. I did install and turn on the weather because I thought that was cool. But most of this stuff you'll see I have turned off. Now, the stuff that comes already here is just little tweaks. It changes slight things about how the desktop works. I'm fine with the default experience right now. Down here, if you click Get More Extensions, you may run into an issue like I ran into where I had installed Google Chrome on the system, and the web browser needs to have a plugin called GNOME Shell Integration to be able to work with that. With Google Chrome, it turned out to not be that big of a deal, or rather with Firefox, it turned out to be not that big of a deal, but with Google Chrome, not only did you have to install the extension, but you also had to install a package on the system so that it would talk to each other, and I decided not to worry with it. So what I did to manage the extensions is I'll go back up here to this Firefox running. I went ahead and installed it in Firefox because it was a one-click deal, and it put the extension here. And now I can manage extensions and add extensions from Firefox. So that's fine. If it doesn't work right out of the box, a little warning message will come up and say, well, I can't figure out that you're running GNOME Shell. You need to install that extension, whatever browser you're using. And the thing about getting the little package installed so that the browser will talk to it is for Chromium, Google Chrome, and Vivaldi. So I did look that up, and that's what it said. If you have more than one application open on a desktop, I want to show this as well. So let's just open up LibreOffice. Okay, so I have LibreOffice running on this desktop. You can, tab back and forth between the two. It's showing everything running on all the desktops. If you have more than one application open, it will group them. There's an extension there where you can change that, where it'll just show you every window. That's fine. I don't care if they're grouped. I can deal with that. Anyway, what I wanted to show you is that when you do this, you'll see all the applications here, and you can control them. This is sort of like an expo mode. So you see all the apps that are open on a desktop, and I can close it here, or I can take LibreOffice and drag it down to the bottom desktop. I can also, if I want to open, let's say, GThumb, instead of opening it directly, I just drag it and put it on the desktop where I want it to appear. Well, actually, it didn't do that, so I'm going to have to drag it down there. Okay. Thought that would do that way, but it didn't seem to. So you see it opened up another desktop. Now, if I switch to this desktop while I'm in Expo mode, I just clicked it once. You can see that I have GThumb open, and now I can close GThumb without actually going back to the desktop. Pretty strange, huh? So what else did I want to talk about here? I want to talk a little bit about resources and memory and that sort of thing with this distribution, because GNOME sucks up more memory when it boots up than any other desktop in the Linux world. It is heavier than KDE, it's heavier than Unity, heavier than Cinnamon, and right now it's saying that I'm using 1.254 MIB of memory, which is MB. Look up the difference between megabytes and MB, or MB. It's different numbering systems. So that's something you see in Linux a lot, is things will be in MIB or GIB. That's gigabytes or MB, and you need to go look that up. Anyway, this desktop, when it first boots up, even with all the stuff that I have turned off, I don't have the software checking for updates in the background. I don't have a lot of stuff going on. It sucks up about 750 megabytes or MB of memory, and that's a lot for just a desktop. But surprisingly, even though it's sucking up all this memory, it seems to be very responsive, especially this version here. This is 3.20 that comes in Ubuntu 16.10. which is a couple of versions back, but that's usually the way Ubuntu GNOME works. They give you a really stable experience. They're not giving you cutting edge GNOME technology. So there you go. That's one of the downsides I see, is that it does suck up a lot of memory. So this is not the desktop for that little old laptop with a 2-core processor and 2 gigabytes of memory in it. You may find that running quite slow, but if your machine has the juice to run it, it's quite an interesting desktop experience. Now, when I installed this machine, just for people who care about such things, let's go ahead and clear the screen and get my screen fetch off of there. I had that up there to show you the stats and everything. Let's go ahead and take a look at how I have this configured a little bit. Some people care about this stuff. So let's just do an lsblk list block, and it will show you that what I have done is I have one hard drive on the system. So that hard drive is a Western Digital Caviar Black 1 terabyte drive, and it has a home partition, and then it has swap, and then it has the system partition. They're all set apart. Because this is Ubuntu 16.10 and it's an interim release of Ubuntu, this is only going to be supported until about July or August of this year, and then I will be forced to upgrade in place or nuke and pave if I should want to continue to use this. I usually stay away from Ubuntu interim releases. They tend to be buggy. Sometimes you can't get packages in there, but in this case, this has actually been really stable. Another reason that I really wanted to give this a try is that I have been wanting to put some distribution on this machine that was running either a later kernel, because curiously, this machine just absolutely does not like the Ubuntu 4.4 LTS kernel. Doesn't work with it at all. I get all kinds of weird audio and video issues. The audio playback is glitchy. The machine is a bit unstable. Sometimes when it suspends, it doesn't wake up, and you have to force it by holding down the power button and all this other stuff. I do not have that problem on the 3.13 kernel, which is the Ubuntu 14.04 currently. That's the one that's being updated. But 3.13 is kind of long in the tooth. Not that it's insecure to run 3.13, mind you, but it just, there's features in there that I'm missing. But if I get up to kernel 4.8, everything works great. And that has been my experience this time around. So where ordinarily I'd be like recommending the long-term support release for people, I'm using an interim Ubuntu release simply because of the fact that it works better on my hardware, which is funny because this hardware is about 7 years old at this point. So you go figure that one out. The older kernels, 4.4 just doesn't work. Okay, what else did I want to talk about with GNOME? That's pretty much the GNOME experience right there. We'll take a few minutes here at the end of the video to talk a little bit about the history of GNOME because it's important. The GNOME desktop in 2010 made a huge leap, and they decided that they were going to completely change everything about the desktop. They went to what you're seeing now, the GNOME 3 experience from the GNOME 2 experience. And this caused the biggest rift in the Linux community because a lot of people who really liked GNOME 2 looked at GNOME 3 and said, what is this garbage? I don't want to use this. So let's actually open up Ubuntu Matei and get that up and running so we can compare it, because Ubuntu Matei looks like GNOME 2. As a matter of fact, the Matei desktop is a fork of the GNOME 2 desktop. So let's just open that up so we have something to look at while we're talking about this. So we had this GNOME 2 experience that everybody liked, but there were kind of bugs in the GNOME 2 desktop. So the GNOME 3 people decided that they were going to completely change it. And this started an avalanche of new desktop development by other people. For instance, Linux Mint, that had been using GNOME 2, decided that they were not going to use GNOME 2 anymore. They decided at that point that, no, we're going to do our own thing. So they came up with Cinnamon. And then Ubuntu did exactly the same thing. They said, well, we're going to not use GNOME 2. They're not going to go to GNOME 3. We're going to come up with our own desktop, and they came up with Unity. So if you wonder where a lot of these weird desktops came from, that's where they come from. And in the case of Cinnamon and Unity, they're still, quote-unquote, based on the GNOME desktop experience. They use GNOME tools. They have all kinds of GNOME-y things going on with them. The GNOME desktop isn't just a desktop, it's also a suite of applications. And other than pure KDE, most desktops out there use parts of GNOME. For instance, there is a tool in GNOME called Disks, and that's ubiquitous. That's one that works on a lot of different desktops. So if you use LXDE or XFCE or any of those sorts of things, a lot of the shortcuts are based on GNOME, the functionality of how you like change screens and things like that. And also they use a lot of those tools. So this is what the Matei desktop looked like, and I have changed this a little bit. So let me see if I can get this to full screen here. It's not wanting to cooperate, probably because I'm recording video and I have 400 other applications open at the same time. Let's try that one more time. There it goes. I was trying to get it to full screen. So this is what the GNOME 2 experience looks like. The stock GNOME 2 had a panel down here. I've combined that here. You can look at my video about Ubuntu Matei that I posted not too long ago, and I talk about all that stuff. So this is a much simpler desktop environment, and the GNOME 2 menu, this is what it looks like. So we went from that to this. This was a huge change. Pretty amazing. But the GNOME 3 experience has gotten better. I mean, I know that there's some people out there who absolutely positively would never use GNOME 3. I understand that. I have used it off and on, and I'm comfortable with it, and I've got the keyboard shortcuts in my brain, so I don't really mind using the workflow. And in the past iterations of the GNOME desktop, I found some things that really annoyed me. Like GNOME 3 used to have it where when you would drag your mouse down here, it would open up a notifications section, and the whole screen would become inactive, and it would sort of compress, and that was really annoying. Now they've just made it so they stick the little notification. If you have like something running down here, like Simple Screen Recorder, which is my screen capture software, you see that I have the little icon that showed up there. And so they've made that a lot better. The notifications used to come up. They used to pop up from the bottom of the screen. Now they have made it so that the notifications don't do that anymore. They have a place for them up here. That was a relatively recent change. And so it's gotten a lot better. And there are people out there who absolutely just swear by the GNOME desktop. And a lot of the more advanced distributions of Linux, the more cutting edge ones, it's the default desktop. So if you talk about Arch or Antergos, or you talk about OpenSUSE or OpenSUSE, however you want to say that, they come at pretty much the standard desktop on that is GNOME. And of course on Fedora, GNOME is the standard desktop as well, although you can get all kinds of different flavors. So there you go, gang. That's a look at all things GNOME. And this is working quite well, so I'm going to be keeping it. There are a couple of applications that are not available in Ubuntu 16.10. So if you're thinking about trying it, I will say this: if you are somebody who uses Skype, you're not going to find it in Ubuntu 16.10. It's just not there, and you can't go to the Microsoft site and download the old. They have Skype for Ubuntu like 12.04 on there. That doesn't work at all either. Of course, Microsoft is working on a new Skype. Hopefully that'll be fixed soon. But for right this moment, they don't have that available for Ubuntu 16.10. There are a few things that I couldn't find in the repositories. So, other than that, I was able to make it work. And of course, the way I'm going to deal with that, if I need to use Skype, I can always run it in a virtual machine. So for instance, I can install Skype here on Ubuntu Matei or Linux Mint 17.3 or whatever, and then I can bring up a virtual machine and have that functionality. I'm not really missing anything that It's not one of those kind of situations where it was a deal breaker. It was just like, oh, Skype. I don't use it very often anyway. As a matter of fact, with clients, I'm using things like Google Hangouts and Facebook chat more and more often and getting away from using Skype anyway. I don't want to do anything to support Microsoft, so I'm not going to do it. So anyway, gang, thank you for watching the video. If you want to play with this, go right ahead. I will have a link in the description to the Ubuntu GNOME site. You can check that out. It's pretty, basic, the site itself, and straightforward. And you can have fun with it. It's just a different Linux experience. And the Ubuntu GNOME 3 experience is a very stable one, at least so far, which is good. So if you want to play around with GNOME, this is a good place to start. Thanks for watching. We'll do it again soon. Be sure and check out Easy Linux on the web, check out Easy Linux on Facebook, and check out freedompenguin.com for lots of really groovy stories about Linux. And I look forward to your feedback concerning GNOME 3. Thanks, guys. Talk to you again soon.